Welcome to October, the spookiest month when everyone participates in the ritual of raising awareness for cybersecurity, which means this week we speak with Chris Romeo from Security Journey about security things every developer should know. In the news segment, ancient web vulns still haunt modern apps. Undying protocol problems return in mobile sequels. GitHub cracks the door open to look for creaky code. Android moves to exorcise its ecosystem, and more. Grab a seat by the campfire and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. It's the show to learn the latest tools, techniques, and processes necessary to understand DevOps, application security, and cloud security. Your trusted source for the latest application security news. It's time for Application Security Weekly. Signal Sciences secures the most important web applications, APIs, and microservices of the world's leading companies, protecting over 7,500 applications and 150 billion production requests per week. Signal Sciences Next-Gen WAF and RASP help companies increase security and maintain site reliability without sacrificing velocity, all at the lowest total cost of ownership. Signal Sciences patented technology protects any application against any attack with integrations into any DevOps toolchain. Signal Sciences, demand more from your WAF. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Signal Sciences. With 84% of cyber attacks targeting the application layer, securing your software is more challenging than ever. Synopsys enables DevSecOps with a portfolio of industry-leading tools including Coverity, Black Duck, and Seeker to help you build secure, high-quality software faster. Synopsys is the leader in application security testing. Visit securityweekly.com/Synopsys to learn more. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACN.
Welcome to Application Security Weekly. This is episode 124, recorded October 5th, 2020. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and I'm here with Matt Alderman. Hello, Matt.
Happy October, Rocktober, Shocktober, whatever tober you want to put onto October.
October, the best month, spooky month, Halloween month. And it's also a great month because, as always, we have John Kinsella with us here. John, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm still trying to figure out what happened to September.
September was, 2 months ago, I think? So, yeah, we'll get back to you. Let us know in the Discord. Would you like to have all of your favorite Security Weekly content at your fingertips, including the content from September? Do you want to hear Sam and Andrea when we have upcoming webcasts and technical trainings? Have a question for one of our illustrious hosts, someone from the Security Weekly team, or wish you could hang with the Security Weekly crew and community? Subscribe on your favorite podcast catcher, sign up for our mailing list, or join our Discord server to stay in the loop on all things Security Weekly. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe. It's official. Security Weekly, in partnership with Cyber Risk Alliance, is excited to present Security Weekly Unlocked on December 10th, 2020. The inaugural edition of Security Weekly Unlocked also celebrates Security Weekly's 15th anniversary. Registration and call for speakers is now open. Visit securityweekly.com/unlocked to submit your speaking session and register for free. Chris Romeo is CEO and co-founder of Security Journey, building security culture and influencing education. His passion is to bring security culture change to all organizations, large and small, by creating and designing gamified security programs. Chris is a highly rated industry speaker and trainer featured at RSA Conference, OWASP Global AppSec, and ISC Squared Security Congress. Chris was the chief security advocate at Cisco for 5 years, empowering engineers to shift security left in all products at Cisco, and led Cisco's Security Belt program. Chris has 23 years of security experience, holding positions across the gamut, including application security, our favorite, security engineering, also our favorite, and incident response, possibly when those two go wrong. Chris also holds the CISSP and CSSLP certifications. Hello, Chris, and thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me here and inviting me to the Application Security Weekly.
Well, happy to have you here, and especially in the month of October when all things are horror movies, and there's a long list of things that characters in a horror movie should know to survive. But applications on the internet are equally face a lot of dangers. So, what are the security things that developers should know about that you think they should know about so that their apps can survive on the internet?
Yeah, I've got a list I've been building over the years as I continue to work with more and more developers. But really, the first one that I like to focus in on is this idea that everyone is a security person. And so that's really one of the goals that I have when I go in to work with a new organization is I want to help instill that security culture. And so we've talked about security awareness in our industry for as long as we can all remember. And it has this idea of, don't click on links, don't let people follow you in the doors. All these are good security principles and things that we want to have, but it doesn't really speak to developers. And I want to help make everyone think of themselves as security people and also to understand that the security need is pervasive. So we want every developer, everyone who's product adjacent to be focusing in and saying, okay, we all need to care about security no matter what our role is across the organization.
Chris, we know security awareness training is tough, right? For regular employees. How do you actually help create that awareness with the developers, right? I know part of it's culture, but is there a technique or a set of ways to really get the developers to understand why security is important when they're developing code?
So I think the first piece of that is delivery. And so we've all been through that security training in big companies where you go through the click next, watch a little bit of video, click next, do a question at the end. And the challenge there is it's boring. Nobody likes to consume that. We don't like it as security people. Developers hate it even more probably than we do. And so part of the way that we reach developers is through delivery. And what I found in the time I spent at Cisco training 25,000 developers from all over the world is when we created content for them that was conversational, so there's no scripts, there's nobody just reading to them off a teleprompter, because nobody wants to hear. I mean, nobody would want to tune into Application Security Weekly if you guys just sat here and read off teleprompters. And so the same idea goes forth into security training. So there's delivery, and there's also the idea of hands-on experimentation. So giving developers a piece of code and letting them actually interact with it, as well as learning the lessons that are most important from kind of a secure coding perspective. That's really what I've seen is the key to successfully reaching developers and actually changing security culture and not just checking the box.
That's got to be it resonates with me because already you're positioning the security team to at the very least be respectful of everyone's time. Because as you point out, I think I would fall asleep just trying to read off the OWASP top 10 off the teleprompter. And I love that you didn't even start with the vulnerability as you're thinking what every developer should know. So there's some collaboration, it sounds like, or at least some respect from the security team talking with developers. Plus, it sounds like, too, just starting that conversation, it didn't sound like you were saying, have this conversation on this particular vulnerability or this type of flaw. It was just really that much more open-ended, start a conversation. So I'm kind of curious, how do those conversations tend to evolve in positive ways, or how have you seen them either be successful or make sure maybe security is part of there as just sort of a moderator, if you will, leading those conversations towards success?
Yeah, when I say security conversations, I'm actually talking about doing that in a video recorded format and something that can be sent out to the entire organization. But part of what I've seen in the success there is we have to start with the foundational principles of security and then build application security on top of it. So many times I've seen companies that have said, like you mentioned, let's jump in with the OWASP top 10. Well, one of the challenges is when we do that, we just assume that developers have all of the background knowledge to understand all of the things that we as security people just take for granted. And so what I've seen in the success that I've had in the past is start with some basic foundational principles of security. So even vocabulary. If you go in to a big company, and I've done this before, and that isn't doing or really focusing on security culture, and you ask a couple different developers, what's your definition of vulnerability? You will get some shockingly different answers from different people because there's never been a level setting of the vocabulary. And that's really the first big start. Before we start jumping into, let's look at all the cool things about vulnerabilities, let's just get everybody to the same understanding and knowledge level where when we say vulnerability, attack, exploit, threat, risk, all of these things, developers aren't imagining what that means, but they actually have that foundational idea.
And it's got to be so there. If everyone is responsible in some way, or everyone is everyone's a security person. That's how you put it, which implies some degree of responsibility. How then do you start to approach the idea that developers can't just, or shouldn't, maybe is the better phrase, just always rely on the security team? Or how do you try to find out? How do you tease out how the developers or DevOps or DevSecOps perhaps are the ones that should be focusing, and this is when they should turn the security team, and this is when they should be dealing with security on their own?
So I think security champions are a big part of how we address this and how we take what our security team can do and magnify it across the organization. So, everybody's talking about security champions these days, but that's really part of the success. Is if we're going to change security culture, we have to have a way to get the right lessons and the right hands-on activities across the organization. But then also we have to have some emissaries who are there that are closer to the individual developers. And when I say emissaries or security champions, these are people that are already passionate about security in some way and are begging for more learning and more education. And they want to be seen as those people who are taking security seriously. Well, if you can tap into those folks, you can have them help you get the message of security further across the organization. And I'll give you an example. So in my time at Cisco, I was responsible for what Cisco calls the Security Advocate Program, which is internally facing. It's aiming at developers and other product adjacent people to say, how can we get that passionate group of security people together and start to channel and get them to move towards common goals? And when I took it over at Cisco, there were about 50 people or so that were still had any interest in it. And I took it and started building it up by having regular monthly meetings and starting to have some shared goals and rewards and recognition and helping people to promote and move forward in their careers as they thought about security. And by the time I left Cisco, that group was about 500 strong. And it got to the point where in the early days, I was going out begging people, will you please come to this meeting and join this and talk about security? To at the end of my time at Cisco, I had people that were pinging me saying, hey, how do I become a security advocate? And we actually had requirements and things like you couldn't just sign up. You had to agree to some things and you had to do some basic education. And so I think that's really how we get closer to the developers as application security people. We're never going to be able to match 1 for 1, 1 for 10. The number, that we see thrown around the industry is 1 for 100 is what a lot of times you see thrown around. And so champions is how we get that magnification of our passion about security and get it across the whole org.
And Chris, it sounds like champions are coming from the development side who have a passion for security. It's not security implanting somebody into the development team.
Yeah, I've had a lot more success with doing more of a grassroots approach where we try to get developers that have some passion for security. And think about it. At Cisco, I had 25,000 developers. There was a small group of people that I just had to find who already thought, hey, this security thing's kind of cool. And one of the really neat things that I'm so happy about is I got to watch some of those champions that were developers become security people and take on security roles at other organizations. And so now we're always talking about this shortage, and we could argue for weeks about what's the actual shortage of cybersecurity. But I've had a chance to actually watch some people grow from developers and transition into security people. And that's really how we have to meet the need that we have is, and it also provides people with a really awesome career progression because they take that development foundation and then they layer security on top of it, which I always think is easier than going the other direction.
I'm sort of thinking between the lines here, Chris. Yeah. So it's interesting conversation here. A few things you've said have been, I think you're pretty sure you got your own podcast too. Obviously we're talking on a podcast here, but what's interesting about some of the thoughts you've said over the last 5-10 minutes, you're talking about recording a conversation and then passing that out, which is, made me think it sounds like a podcast. But bringing that back a little more essentially again to what you're just talking about of, keeping people interested and getting people interested in this. One of the problems with either a podcast or a meetup, or I think I've talked about this before in other shows, is you're always looking for new material. How do you keep it interesting, right? So you're hinting at some of the things there, but it'd be interesting to hear you talk a little bit more about within an organization. We're used to, as you said again, the yearly or the quarterly or the bang of the drum. Okay, we have to get this thing done, testing and that type of thing, training. How do you keep excitement up that people want to come to those meetings month after month and they're actually excited to submit that they want to talk about something new or to get involved? It's more than just saying, hey, we heard about a new SQLi or a cross-site scripting. What have you found from a corporate point of view that kept people coming back for more?
One thing that I did figure out in my time running the Security Advocate program was there's a lot of people in our industry that if you reach out to them and say, hey, would you come and talk to my security champion group for 30 minutes virtually? There's a lot of people that'll actually do that. And if you want them to get on a plane and fly to your location and sit in a meeting room with you, the answer is more than likely no, unless you want to pay some money. But what I found is a lot of the folks that speak at conferences are open to coming in and doing a 30-minute talk and then doing Q&A. And so I was able to bring in some big name folks and use that as a way to continually drive interest in what we were doing. And the great thing for the speakers that are out there is a lot of those folks have either a primary talk or a few talks they're doing in a given year. And so you're not even really asking them to do anything new. You're just asking them to come and share that with our community and then have a Q&A. So that's one way that I approached it. Another way was, and what I did at Cisco was building multiple levels of content. And so we had this idea of security belts. And so somebody got started, they were working on their white belt, then they could work towards their green belt. Think Six Sigma, think, martial arts from thousands of years. But what we could do there is continually have new levels of content that we're being invested in to give people a path towards that, becoming that security black belt at some point. And so those are some of the ideas that I come up with to think about, how can we make this more engaging? How can we connect? And I can say even for small companies, as long as you don't want folks to travel, there's a lot of people out there that want to make our community better, that are willing to jump on a call for 20 or 30 minutes and talk to your security champions. I'm one of those people. I do it all the time. And it's very rewarding, and it doesn't take a whole lot of time from my perspective. I'm talking about 30 minutes.
What you're also getting there, Chris, is a lot about incentives, and you kind of hinted at this a little bit in some of the what you were saying earlier. And a lot of this is describing sort of the what's in it for me, to be blunt about it. I'll say to become a security champion. And as Matt pointed out, there is often a self-selecting. I'm interested in security. I'd love to learn more. I'd love to use this as a stepping stone to get a security role in even another organization. But there can also be some areas where it's pretty challenging to get people to be incentivized to join, to participate. So when organizations do run into those tougher situations, what are some ways that you've managed to build good incentives or really grow organically, because that sounds really successful as you've done it, a good security champions program?
Yeah, if you have the ability to give cold hard cash, that is always the best opportunity. And I'll give you an example. So at Cisco, with our security belt program, we had an existing rewards and recognition HR style program where managers had budget set aside. And so what I did is when someone would finish their white belt, I would generate a scripted email that would go to their manager and a separate email to the individual employee. But the manager one would say, hey, your employee just did something really cool here. They earned a security belt, they learned some knowledge, and they're going to be able to apply this to help your team be better at security. Why don't you give them $100 cap award is what we called it. So give them $100 reward for doing this awesome thing. And when they got their green belt, it was about $250. When they got their black belt, it was $500. So it was really, something that was very tangible at that point. And what I found is if you think about how much a single vulnerability costs a large organization, by the time you get done with going through your whole PCERT process, mitigating, remediating, building fixes, pushing those out, customer cost and support as people are trying to apply patches and everything, you're gonna be hard pressed to find a single vulnerability that doesn't cost more than $1 million. And when you add up all the costs. And so my argument always back to management and anybody who thought maybe this was a bit of a stretch was to say, well, how much does an individual PCERT cost us? Oh, multiple millions. I'm talking about $100 at a time. It takes a lot of $100 at a time to get close to the cost of one PCERT. So if this program prevents one PCERT from happening, we've already made money on the deal. And so that was an argument that was well received by anybody who was looking at this, going, we don't think we should give money. So money is definitely a good way to do it. One of the other things I was able to do at Cisco that I'm also super proud of was, for our security champions, we were able to start a cybersecurity master's degree from San Jose State, and we made it specific to our champions. And so, and San Jose State even let us come in and draw on the whiteboard and say, okay, what do you want to cover in this? And they mapped their classes to it, and they added some additional classes. So it was a software security focused master's degree. But one of the other cool things is I was able to get the executive VP to fund it. So it wasn't like tuition reimbursement where people had to keep putting out their own money and getting reimbursed. It was paid for by the company. It was a benefit for our champions. And we invited those champions who were really the ones that have been with us for years, that were really putting the effort in. And I think there's been, 30 or 40 people that have graduated from that now, from inside of Cisco. And most of them, through that process, transitioned from development, test, what other jobs they were doing, to now moving into other cybersecurity focused roles. I won't even say specifically AppSec, but a lot of them landed in AppSec, but even just cybersecurity in general.
It's cool. Those sound like wonderful incentives, in fact. And I think, too, is especially describing that master's program, so security champions are learning a lot. I think we've gone, this conversation and what you're describing is very much beyond just awareness of security and having that shared vocabulary of vuln, attack, exploit, etc. So either what then, what's a good maturity or good next step for security champions to sort of take on, whether it's something that they should know that would be on your personal list, or perhaps ways that, the PCERT doesn't have to get involved because code is better, as you were pointing out, with really good quantifying budget improvement, a budget impact. So security improvements, as I'm trying to say here, stumbling.
Yeah, when I think about how we get champions more engaged and what's the best place to really get them fired up, and what's the thing that we can really invest in that has a huge return right from the beginning, and it's always going to be threat modeling for me. Like whenever somebody says, hey, you're coming in cold to our company, we've never really taken security seriously, what should we do first with our developers? My answer is also going to be threat modeling, because I've seen the power in developers actually understanding and seeing the value in threat modeling. They don't always see it right from the very beginning, but when you start to work through an example, and that's one of the things that, if I'm talking about champions or developers in general, that we're always going to do from a threat modeling perspective. If you're ever going to teach someone threat modeling, spend no more than 5 minutes talking about threat modeling, because the people that are listening don't care about it as much as we do. But when you get on the whiteboard and you start drawing a diagram and you start picking apart something that they've built, and the way I do it is just by asking questions. Some questions I think I know the answer to, others I don't. Others I just throw out randomly. And what I've seen time and time again, though, is developers and champions both will hit that moment where they'll just kind of get quiet for a second. And they'll go, oh, okay, now I see the value. I see why you're trying to get me to go through this process. And so that's I think is a high value thing we can do for champions, especially when they're new, to move them forward and get them even more excited about security.
And Absolutely. Even if you pay a champions program, it's probably way cheaper than running a bug bounty program. And the return on investment is greater, because now those people are internal to the organization, instead of a bunch of external people just handing you bug after bug after bug.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's a great investment. And I would say, in my experience, the last couple of years is where we're really seeing people start to take this seriously at the biggest companies. And I think some of the smaller companies are following along now with kind of mini versions of champions programs. But I'm a huge advocate for these things. I think, like Matt, to your point about the bug bounty, I mean, this is something that keeps the value internally. HR departments are always talking about rewards and recognition, and employees are always answering on surveys that we're not rewarded enough, we're not recognized enough. And here's a built-in program that makes security accessible, fun, and gives people a way to experience those rewards and recognition.
Chris, I'm completely in agreement. I love threat modeling, and if you got another 5 hours, let's continue this conversation on it. But your point is made about spend the 5 minutes. But even so, I do want to ask, if we're turning why threat modeling rather than turning this internal security champions team on some internal bug hunting for themselves, for example? Maybe why not just give them instead Burp Proxy or Z-Attack Proxy and have them go just do a whole bunch of pen testing on all the apps, and that's an approach to take.
So from my perspective, the return on investment for the amount of time it takes to go through that threat modeling experience with people is just going to be higher than getting into things like Zap or Burp or teaching some of those techniques. When I think threat modeling, I'm thinking, and like we probably all are, we're pulling back, we're looking at the design. And my conclusion here is somebody who understands threat modeling is going to be even better at bug hunting, because now we've given them that tool chest of things to think about. And imagine when they have that knowledge of here's all the potential threats or the main types of classes of threats we need to consider. And now you're adding Zap or something like that on top of it. Now they've got a whole new perspective to be able to see what those issues are that they're going to find. And I think it helps them to test for those issues better.
Yeah, threat modeling doesn't require you to have the skill set to learn the tool on how to use the tool to go find the bug, where threat modeling through a facilitated exercise, as you described, is really easy Q&A. And as you're answering those questions and you start to map it out on a whiteboard, then you're like, oh, yeah, that is a potential issue. And no one had to learn a tool to figure that out.
Yeah, I still hold that the whiteboard is the best threat modeling tool that's out there. And there are great tools in our industry to do this, but you have to have a foundation in threat modeling to get there. And so the whiteboard and that shared experience has been where I've seen the real power.
So in current times, I usually try to avoid this topic, but we are in current times. Have you gotten a chance over the last few months to validate that over a Zoom or a Slack or some other sort of digital whiteboard? Is it a similar effect that you're seeing, or any thoughts about that?
It's funny. Adam Shostak and I actually had a conversation about this, specifically about remote threat modeling and talking through what are some of the things that we have to consider here, because, it is a different dimension than if we're in the same room. And we actually loaded up kind of on the fly draw.io, which is a decent flow charting web-based tool that it gives you the same things like Google Docs does when I'm typing and we're both in the same document, you can see what I'm typing. And so that's one of the things that it gives you kind of, there's that shared experience. But yeah, we realized coming out of that collaboration is really one of the big keys that has to happen there. And so being able to really focus in and be so deliberate. And like, if you're going to have a group of people, say you have 5 to 10 people that are going to do a virtual threat modeling where you're doing this teaching experience, you're going to have to be very careful that people don't just drift off into the background. Because you could very easily have 2 to 3 people who are super excited, they're engaged, they're answering all the questions, they're going. Then you've got 3 or 4 people who are just kind of in the background on mute, not paying attention. And so one of the things that both Adam and I were talking about, we both realized is you're going to have to facilitate differently. Meaning you're going to have to look at the list of participants and say, I haven't heard from Jane in a while. So, hey, Jane, what do you think about this particular threat that you see on the screen right now in front of us? Not from the sense that we want to embarrass anybody, but just from, we've got to keep drawing people back in because it's a different experience. When we're in the room, we can be reading people's body language and some people may be like nodding and they're really dialed in, but they're not saying anything. That's part of what we miss in the virtual environment. So yeah, definitely something that we got to be very deliberate about to have the same success we would have with an in-room experience.
A lot of what you've been describing, Chris, are different skills that I think typically aren't talked about as necessary or important for security. And clearly, was reading your bio, you have a background in application security. And I'm quite sure that you've done your fair share of pen testing. But even just as you're describing about facilitating distributed online whiteboarding sessions, you're pointing out communication skills, educational skills, that all seem pretty important, especially if you're getting this really force multiplier that's come out of it of building out a security champions program. So at what point at what point did these sort of skills become evident to you as important for security? And are there other skills that you would also highlight to point to security orgs and say, this is also what you should be learning? These are ways to be more effective with your dev teams.
Yeah, one of the things that I've always been a proponent of all the way back to when I built up the master's program for San Jose State specific to Cisco, I wrote in a box when I mapped out all the classes, soft skills. And all the professors stopped for a second and stared at that and they said, why did you put that up there? And I got to explain to him, one of the things that I've seen in my career is that having the ability to collaborate and have those conversations and break down those walls, it has been a huge part of the success that I've had. And it's not because I'm never the smartest person in the room. It doesn't matter what the particular topic is. I'm not the smartest person in the room. But by being tuned into this idea of soft skills, of being able to collaborate and knowing kind of different people's learning styles and having this kind of perspective. And so that's something that I think that all of us as a community need to be thinking more about, is how do we get into this mode of, let's actually teach our security people and our developers. Let's start thinking about this more instead of just thinking it as, that's something nobody needs any education on. Embracing this idea of soft skills and having a solid set of soft skills is what really allows developers and security to work closely together. And, one of the other challenges that we've all seen is you go into an environment and security is the enemy. Well, why is security the enemy in that environment? Probably because what security's been saying is no to all the cool things that developers want to do, because we know developers as individuals want to build cool, innovative new things. They wanted to take new tech and put it together. And when they have something cool, by coming to them and saying, well, we're from security and no, I'm sorry, we can't do that. That's not. What do we do? What do they do next time when they have something cool? Mm-hmm. We know exactly what they do. They say, I'm not talking to those folks over there. All they did was try to take all the fun out of what we do in our job. And so by having this idea that security is going to be an ally, not an opponent, just a crucial approach, and soft skills really plays into that bigger idea.
Yeah, the ability to have the conversation, understand what they're trying to do, why they're trying to do it, how maybe better to do it in a secure fashion instead of just saying no. Huge benefit for the security teams these days.
I think the next time someone asks me why I went into security, I'm going to say because I wanted to take the fun out of other people's jobs.
Words to strive for. Well, Chris, I don't know how long of a list you might have had, but you've already given us just everyone's involved with security. Threat modeling is a really crucial way of building security-minded thinking. As we start to close out here, are there a couple of other items that you really do wish that every developer should know about security? Or perhaps go ahead.
Give you my short list here of not everything that I have, but the next one that I always focus in on is you can't hack yourself secure, which in some circles, this is a very controversial statement, but I'm not afraid to say it because I think of things through the world of the builder and defender side, and not always from the breaker side. Yes, I agree. The breaker perspective, red teaming, pen testing, this is important. These are things that we have to do, but so often I see it as the primary focus, when fixing vulnerabilities, writing better code are all things that ultimately make that pen testing, red teaming experience find less things at the end of the day. A few other things, I just want to plug OWASP as well, because one of the things that I found a couple of years ago, I thought, hey, I've been involved in AppSec for a long time. I kind of know all the things. I went to OWASP's website and started poking around, and there's like 150 different projects there. And so one of the other things that I wish every developer had a perspective or knew about is the fact that OWASP has so many valuable resources. I'll give you one, for example, the proactive controls. I had no idea this thing even existed like 2 years ago. The proactive controls is the developer answer to the OWASP top 10. What do developers need to do to try to mitigate the top 10 issues? Sure, the OWASP top 10 has some of those mitigations in it, but the proactive controls is totally focused on that. Once again, I didn't even know it existed. And so there's a lot of different things that are out there. We could get into DevSecOps and the fact that the second DevOps should be silent. GitHub is not the best secret store. I wish developers knew that. And unfortunately, we still see too much of that in our industry. Like, I think we should have that one solved. There's just a lot of good things. But the whole point here is these are the things that we as security people just kind of take for granted. And really part of my mission is saying, how do we get these things out to the developers that are out there? Because that makes them better application security people, but it also makes us better AppSec people as well.
Sounds great to me, and I'd love to know where can people find more about the mission that you're on, either whether content or your own podcast.
Yeah, so the Application Security Podcast is one way that people can hear various interviews that I do with people across the community. And you can also find more information about my general mission at www.securityjourney.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks very much for putting yourself in the position to have to answer the questions instead of asking them. We would definitely appreciate that, Chris.
Definitely the harder part is answering the questions.
Absolutely. I just get to sit back here and laugh while you all are making the good jokes. And also want to thank Matt and John for joining us as well. We're going to take a quick break, then we'll return with News of the Week.